So we'll go and get started. It is February 5th, 2021. My name is Paul Ortiz. I'm here with my colleague Adolfo Romero. We're interviewing Ronald Anderson. First of all, Ron, thank you so much for giving time. You know, I know you're very busy. Thank you for taking time out for us.
You're very welcome.
Well, very, very cool. So I wonder if we could talk about, and we'll talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of your initial kind of entree into the Opportunity Scholars Program. But what is the program, kind of to start out with, like, what does it mean to you? I mean, because you've had a lot of interaction, a lot of work with the program. And what does the Opportunity Scholars Program mean to you personally?
Yeah, so, I've been either as a student or as an actual full-time employee or as a student assistant going back to 1987. So the University of Florida is a place that's very, very near and dear to my heart. I guess my direct answer to that is I wish it was around when I was here, because I'm a first-gen student. I was raised by grandparents, neither of which went to college. And it was interesting that I was originally from New York and came to Florida with them, as apparently all elderly people do, in the early 80s. And they moved to Gainesville for one specific reason. They moved to Gainesville because, as they used to call me, Ronnie, they said, Ronnie needs to go to college, so we're going to live in a town that has a college. May seem very simple, but hey, apparently it worked, and that's how I got here. So to me, this program is exceptionally important because I can personally relate to the students who are in the program. I can think back to when I walked out of Broward Hall in 1987, and I was scared. I didn't know. I mean, I left my high school, which was only 8 miles away, but I didn't know what it was going to be like in a classroom. I didn't know the right things to ask. I had no idea that I could, if I had to withdraw from a semester, I could do that. And I mean, these things seem all so mundane, but it's not. It's not to these students. I didn't receive any type of financial aid because I didn't even know there was such a thing. So I worked on campus and I worked off of campus as well, which, it's definitely not a bad thing, but my life could have been a little bit easier if I didn't have those things. So when I speak with students who are MFOS students, I feel as though I can really see through their eyes many times. And and I tell people, in my role that it's not the questions or not the answers that you give to students that is the most important thing. It's answering the questions that they don't know to ask. And they don't know enough to ask these questions, not because they're not, intelligent at all. It's because this is not what they were brought up and raised in. They don't have a legacy of fifth generation Gators coming to school here, So anyway, that's kind of my very immediate response to that question.
Well, Ron, speaking of that, I wonder if you could, you've talked about how you think today, years after graduating from the University of Florida, you can use your experiences as a first generation and college student to kind of connect to our students today. Could you tell us a little bit more about your experiences? Like, do you remember the first time you set foot on campus? You talked a little bit about that, but like, what was it like for you as a first generation student here? Was the University of Florida everything you thought it would be? Were there people who kind of helped you, or did you really have to kind of feel things out on your own?
Honestly, it was very much on my own. Even though I lived in the same town that I went to high school in, I felt, at least for definitely the first semester and probably throughout the second semester, I deeply still felt attached to my high school and just what you were comfortable with and the people that you were surrounded by. Honestly, and it's not that this was 100 years ago, but it wasn't absolutely, as I guess, put into young persons' heads that college is something that is important that you should do. And so many of my friends from high school never went to college. They never went to college, right? And not that that's a bad thing, but it just wasn't something that was like nowadays, it's so embedded in all of our messaging and what we tell young persons that, unless you go to college, you're not going to be able to be successful and you can't do this. And there's a lot of truth behind that. But I guess my point is that many of my friends never went to school. The other thing is that when growing up in the same town that you go to college in, you tend to not expand yourself as much on campus and meeting newer people because you still have that same subgroup of students that you're friends with from high school. So it was more like I would go to class, but I felt like I was almost going to a commuter school, right? I would strictly go to class, do my work, and go home. And there was not this high level of involvement that I think is produced at times when a person comes from either out of state or from another city, and they're left having to do those things. So in some ways, it was beneficial. It was easier on me because I could just, drive across town and hang out with people I've known for 10 years, or, versus not having any support there. But in terms of the support, and I'm just being, brutally honest, I never saw an academic advisor ever. I didn't even know there were academic advisors. The one person who ever gave me any type of academic advice was a sociology professor. He has since retired, and the only reason he gave me any advice was he was the neighbor of my grandparents. His name was Tony LaGreca. He taught in the sociology department. And he's the only person who ever gave me like any kind of guide and structure of, how to go about doing things and maneuvering.
What did he tell you?
The one thing that sticks in my mind is he wrote down his salary on a piece of paper, and he said, "This is how much money I make." And at the time, that was a decent, fair wage of what he was making. And he was saying that, here are the things that you could do, and he was approaching it more from a job perspective, salary, perspective, but not really charting out what I should be doing. I mean, my Bible was the undergraduate catalog, and you, as opposed to now when you can just click, do a degree audit, and see what it is that you're missing or anything. You had to, you looked it up, and you're like, all right, I need to have 3 credits of social science, I need to have 4 credits of this, and that, and then, without going to an advisor, you're just kind of hoping for the best, like, I guess this was good, I did it right, and so it was kind of a trial by fire in lots of ways.
Yeah. Well, one more question, Ron, about those years. As you matriculated to UF and as you negotiated the campus and your undergraduate studies, were you thinking then about a career or jobs, or was it just really focused on just getting your degree?
Focused on just getting my degree. I had no idea of what I was going to do. I did. At some point along the way, I was interested in working with either the FBI or working with national security. But that obviously didn't happen, and that really was not truly anything I really thought of. I mean, when I graduated, I was woefully underprepared for the job market. I mean, there was a recession going on at the time. That didn't help matters. But, I continued working as a student assistant in the College of Engineering, and I worked part-time at night as a doorman at a bar. And this is like when I first graduated, just to make ends meet. I did actually get hired immediately out of college. One thing that was helpful was the Career Resource Center, and they have their the career showcase that they have. And my last semester here, I interviewed with Northwestern Mutual Insurance, and many interviews, including a handwriting analysis, which I don't even know if that has any merit at all. But anyway, they decided to hire me, and so they hired me. And I'm 22 years old or whatever it was, and I had a my own little office and everything, and I thought, wow, this is great. I mean, I got a job, and these jobs can actually pay quite a bit of money. But the key was this: for the first 6 months, you get nothing. You don't get a dollar of training. I don't even know how that's legal, but anyway, so I started working for these people, making no money. I had to give up both of my other jobs that actually paid me something, and I tried negotiating with the boss, and he's like, Ron, you're just going to have to rely on your savings, to start. I'm like, what savings? I mean, this kid just got out of school. He doesn't have nothing. And so that job existed. I want to say I worked there about a month. And I've never done this ever before in my life, or ever since. But I got up at lunch, and I said to the lady, I said, I'll see you later. And she thought, I'll be back in an hour. That was it. And so then I got called. The boss, of course, calls me a couple of days later. It's like, Ron, what's going on here? What are you doing? And I said, I can't exist without making money. You guys aren't paying me anything. I have to go find work. And he's like, well, let's have lunch. Let's think about this. And then I thought, okay, well, he's going to come around. I mean, pay me a couple $100 a week, something. No, they weren't. And so I finally departed at that point in time.
Did he at least buy your lunch?
I think so. I think I had lunch. But
wow.
Anyway.
I can't say I blame you at all. Wow. That is intense. Yeah, I wonder how that was even, legal. It's not even an apprenticeship. That's like indentured servitude.
Yes. I mean, it literally was, during your training, you are not going to get paid, because the majority of the money that you would make was based upon commission of insurance policies and annuities that you'd sell and the maintenance of those. And like I said, those persons who had been there, they made a very large amount of money for the time. But that's not what I was interested in.
Exactly. Right. Well, cool, Ron. Thank you for, sharing the part of your life history up through undergraduate and soon after. I wonder if we could kind of fast forward to your initial interactions and familiarity with the Opportunity Scholars program.
Okay, sure. So at the time, I worked within Student Financial Affairs, the financial aid office here at UF, and I was one of the associate directors at the time. And so my role formally was I supervised kind of, partially the mechanics and the processing of the financial aid, right? So there's a lot of, like I said, processes that go into that when you're dealing with, 50,000 students and millions of dollars of aid, and it's probably helpful to get it right. So, but my other roles were involved in training and development, which is what I liked a lot more, quite frankly. And so at the time, Karen Folks was the director of financial aid, and I believe Vice President Patricia Tejas Irvin was the VP of Student Affairs then. Kratzer was the associate. He was either the associate vice president at the time, or he was running the union at the time. I forget, one or the other. But anyway, so the way that this kind of all again, this is my memory, so I may be off a little bit on some of this, but as I remember things, President Machen tasked the vice president of student affairs, or maybe concurrently tasked the Director of Financial Aid and the Vice President of Student Affairs for a proposal to create a program that was similar to, I believe, what was known as the Carolina Covenant. And the Carolina Covenant, which was coming out of North Carolina, was a program that basically allowed students to graduate debt-free based upon some type of financial criteria that they would have to prove initially. And so at that time, I think they were one of the only ones around, and I want to say that that was at a very fledgling state as well. And so, again, I wasn't at the table in terms of the negotiations between the president and the vice president and the director of financial aid at the time of kind of like who was charged in doing what. But what I did know was that Karen Folks, the director of financial aid, really was, in terms of boots on the ground, crunching the numbers, figuring out what it was going to take for us to be able to do this, and was really in my opinion, the architect of the mechanics of the program. While she herself did not necessarily think of the program, right? She was the one who put into place the architecture in order for it to start off. So when it started off, it was strictly a financial aid program, and it was run out of the financial aid office. Karen did all of the selection of the students. She was working tirelessly to determine the eligibility requirements, and then my role in it was more of the student support piece of it. And so shortly after we determined, okay, here are the criteria of what we would use in order to select students for this program, and this is how many students we can, afford to do. We realized that just throwing money at people probably isn't the wisest thing in the sense of, really giving them any type of real support. I mean, you look at how many, those shows with people who, they win the lottery and they're broke in 5 years, right? So not to say that these people were winning the lottery, but, if I had been handed, $8,000, back when I was in school, I probably would have had a pretty good time, but, so we started putting into place, certain things that we thought were important for these students. So one of them was a financial literacy piece. And so students, I ran the different programs that developed that. So we had like a credit and budgeting course that we had the students have to go to. When I say course, workshops that they had to go through. We had them do career resource type workshops, and we would stagger these things kind of throughout, their existence at the university. They didn't do everything all up front. It was just kind of spread out. We did, application workshops, in order for the students to, know how to successfully do this year after year, because it's, you have to apply for the thing, and you have to show eligibility each school year. And so I did basically the behind the scenes and then front of the house work with the students on the student support piece through the financial aid office. So then kind of concurrent with that, and this again, I don't exactly know when this began, but it was quickly realized that this isn't just a financial aid thing. This is much bigger than financial aid. And so that's when Leslie was tapped to begin working, and she may have been doing this without my knowledge before this, so I don't want to sell her short in any way, but it was at a certain point in which it was determined that student affairs needs to have a hand in this, and that's where Leslie began. And this program, it didn't have a budget. It didn't have really much of anything to support itself. It was kind of like I was doing this in addition to like my other work that I was being charged in doing, which I was fine with, but it's not like they set out and said, okay, we have $500,000 here. We're going to hire 3 coordinators to do this job, and we have fringe and, this, that, and the other. That's not how it started. It was a very kind of building the plane as it was flying through the air approach in doing that. And so as years went on, things became much, much more sophisticated in the sense of the level of student support. And most of all, I mean, Leslie is absolutely phenomenal in the work that she did to get the program to where it is today. I mean, she made it a nationally recognized, state-of-the-art first-gen program that I guarantee you there are other schools with, across the country that look to the University of Florida as the model for this. So, I mean, just through her efforts, and now, then probably, I want to say maybe 6 years ago or so, 7 years ago, she was able to start to actually get a team of actual real employees, to work with her. And now, the two assistant directors that work in the program, they work in tandem and hand in hand in providing, all sorts of programming and support. And the financial aid piece of it really now has gone back to just financial aid, processing the money, figuring out who's getting what, keeping track of the disbursements and the like. And not to minimize that being an important piece of it, but it's, when you look back, 15 years ago to where the program, kind of like the marching orders of the program at that point, compared to what is relevant and what is, the real integral pieces of support to our students now, it's a much different animal. It's a much different thing. Because, even, as the saying goes, you can fix a problem by throwing money at it. That works in cars, but it doesn't work with people.
Ron, I wonder, you talked about some of the early interactions you had with the students and workshops and the support piece. Could you talk about a little more about these early, sessions and your impression of the students back then, when you first started, working with them on some, say financial literacy or some of these other kind of, how to be successful types of things. What was your impression of the students and how would you, how would you work with them?
Yeah, so basically we would have a series of these workshops, 1 or 2 a week for the entirety of a semester to be able to get all of the students kind of through them. And the first workshop was on budgeting. It was either budgeting or credit, one or the other. Anyway, and so students this goes to show you how kind of unsophisticated, things were. I mean, in order for students to sign up for these things, I can't say I asked one of our programmers within the office to put together just some type of file sharing system so that students could actually go ahead and sign up, online, and we would get a record rather of their registration, and that would limit how many people were in each of the classes, because we held these classes in this little conference room within Peabody Hall. And so, all the students, 20 of them at a time would pack on in there, and I would start doing my, dog and pony show, so to speak, on credit or budgeting. And I remember distinctly, because one of the things I would always emphasize to them, and these are, first semester students, I said, even though you may not have a credit card, it's important that you know what your credit looks like, and to ensure that you don't have anything on your credit report that that is incorrect or that could harm you later on down the road. And so I would tell them this is the site that you go to. This is the free government site. I think it's annualcreditreport.com. I think is what it is. And you can go in there. I said you get a free credit report once a year. I really suggest that you go ahead and do this immediately, even though you may not have any credit. Well, about 2 weeks after, I remember this one session that we had, this young lady contacted me. She came back into the office asking to speak with me. And lo and behold, her father had used her Social Security number and identity, racked up about 50 grand of credit card debt on her. She had no idea that any of this ever happened. Her father didn't tell her. And so, yeah, there I was, a very bad place to be is somewhere between a daughter and a father. And you don't want to be there. And so how to navigate and have that type of conversation of, assisting her with still keeping boundaries of myself from the family, that type of thing. She eventually had contacted, unfortunately, she finally took my advice and she contacted the police, and it was a police matter, and the police charged him with fraud and the like, because without doing that, she would have been stuck. She would have been stuck with this credit, or rather bill. But most of the sessions were not so eventful. The students were. We also had we did post and pre-test for their knowledge on the credit and for budgeting, and so we would put that in, and we were using that to kind of show the worthwhile of doing this in the first place. And so I really do think that if I had been given the ability to have known some of these things, and none of this is rocket science, so to speak. But it's things that you either learn by trial and error over the course of a decade or so, or you can kind of get a crash course in this and know at least a little bit about it.
Exactly. Well, Ron, how else did you work kind of one-on-one with the students in those early years? You mentioned the workshops. Obviously, these are group processes. Were you also working with students one-on-one periodically, like helping them kind of negotiate UF?
To some extent, it was probably outside of those workshops. It was probably more in my capacity as a associate director when students were found to be ineligible for further funding due to whatever extenuating circumstances, whether those are grades, they didn't make the cut on their GPA, or they dropped courses and they had family problems back at home, and or medical issues, or any of those things. And so I worked with them in terms of petitioning and appealing through that to regain eligibility for the students. Not that this is, I'm just adding this because it does have a little bit of relevancy. So you're probably familiar with UF's Promise program. It's run by Dr. Angelia Browdy out of Academic Affairs.
Oh yeah, a little bit. I can't remember though now. It's
yeah. And so on my very early onset as an actual real employee at UF, I worked with those students, and so many of those students identify as first-gen students. They're not exclusively first-gen students, right? But many of them were, and so that kind of got me a little bit started into this. But really, it's when the FOS program, came about, is when I was very much interested in working with these students. I find, and not always, but I would say if I was to give an overall opinion of your first-gen student in terms of their willingness to try, their tenacity, their just overall drive to want to succeed, and quite honestly, their gratitude of being here is greater than non-first-gen students. And again, I don't have any data to back it up with, but I do have, my own anecdotal, interactions with literally thousands of students over the last 25 years that I can probably say, where things kind of shake out. So,
what would have been some of the memorable interactions you've had with the students in the Opportunity Scholars Program as you kind of think back? I know there must be so many, but are there
Um, I'm going through names in my head. Um, just students who I knew they would never ever have been here. I mean, they would have gone to school somewhere, more than likely, right? Maybe not absolutely likely, but more than likely they would have gone to school somewhere. I mean, we draw, across the student body, we draw a lot of students from, the Miami-Dade area, you know, Duval County, any of the major cities in Gainesville, in Florida. And a lot of those students would probably have gone to, Miami-Dade, college, fine, right? They would have gone there, probably started there, or they would have gone to some other state college, may or may not have moved on to a four-year institution. The biggest impediment is, well, I think there's two large impediments. One being the obvious, money, being able to afford. I mean, those students who are from South Florida who qualify for this program otherwise would not have no means to be able to travel 300 miles, stay here in Gainesville, pay for an apartment, live on their own, pay their tuition, and be able to exist without some type of assistance, or else they're borrowing way beyond their means in order to go to school, right? The second, and this is my opinion, the second impediment, I think, at times can be family. And when I say family, in the sense that there's oftentimes a very strong urge to not leave that family circle, and they choose not to want to move on somewhere. They want to keep their son or their daughter kind of local or closer. And the arguments are like, well, why go to UF? You could go to FIU. You could go to FAU. You can go here. Why leave town? Why do those things, right? And then sometimes it's flat out they just don't support their student going to college. They think that the family thinks that they need to work in the family business, which most of these people didn't have a family business, but or just to work locally. So, I'm not saying that that's the case for every first-gen student. I will say what is probably the most common theme is the family does not have not only the financial resources, but just the advising resources, if that's a term, just to give that type of advice, to their son or to their daughter. I mean, I couldn't ask my grandparents for any help. I mean, they did a great job in the sense of, allowing me to graduate school debt-free. I mean, they paid for my tuition, and they paid for my books, and then I paid for my living, and that's how that worked. But I certainly couldn't go back and say, I have this calculus class, and I am having this issue for the teacher, and, My grandfather was an ex-New York City cop. He was not exactly soft around the edges with things. And so, I don't regret anything, but I would have liked a little bit of help.
Right, exactly. We all would, right? Adolfo, do you have, I know you've been taking notes. Do you have questions, or Ron?
Yes, actually I do. I've just been kind of writing while you guys talked, and great discourse, definitely. I love the way that the people that you brought up, Karen, which the selection of students and requiring, like she would be the one selecting the students, correct? Do you know last names? It would be great to also do an interview with her. Like I said, it would be great, but we could share that information after. That's okay. But I was just thinking, let me see, what question should I ask you here? So yeah, just to begin, what years did you work from? Were you active? I mean, were you active from 2006 all the way to this point, or did you take a break in between, or what was between those years?
Yeah, in 2010, I took on the role of UF's ombudsman, and so I left the financial affairs area and moved over here. And my daily interactions, my daily work, ceased on that level. But I've always stayed on Leslie's advisory committee, and so that's something that I still sit on. And she has folks from around campus that are a part of that committee. But, you know, in terms of that's the only official thing that I still have with MFOS. Unofficially, you know, in my role and what I do right now, I see a lot of first-gen students. I mean, a lot of first-gen students seek assistance through my office. And I'm guessing to some extent that they are referred by people like Leslie or others that know that I've worked with them. So.
Okay. What were some challenges for the program that you initially faced, and how has that program evolved from those things to happen again? Because I mean, there is an evolution from like 2006, I feel like, to 2013, and then again, it lifted up from 2013 to this point on. So I just kind of want to see how you guys, I mean, you went through this challenges, but surpassed those challenges.
Yeah, I would say, and I go back to what I had said earlier, we didn't know, maybe she did, meaning Karen, but collectively, I mean, if I'm considering myself part of that, we didn't know enough of what to know was a challenge at times. We were just trying to, you know, all right, so our budget is, you know, $8 million. How many students can we fund with $8 million? All right, we can fund 250 students. All right, what's the gift percentage? Or now how much money are they going to get from this fund? How much money we're going to get from this fund? And so just the mechanics of that. Oh, yeah, we probably should have some type of you know, some type of training here for these students so that they learn how to budget their money. Oh, yeah, well, they'll probably get credit cards when they will need. So it was just this. I don't know. It's hard for me to describe what the challenges were when we didn't know enough of what should be challenging. We just tried to make it happen.
Thank you. Let me see. Another question that I had, would you guys go to other districts to recruit new students or no? Or it would be all by random, by the time they applied?
Yeah, so one of the things that the program is, I think, somewhat unique in is that there is no intentionality of who gets into the program. So you're an otherwise admitted University of Florida student, and then there's an analysis that's done in the spring semester to determine your potential eligibility for the program itself. So all of the students who applied to UF didn't have a clue as to whether they were going to get funding or not. And then even when they were admitted, they didn't know they were going to get funding or not. It was only until later in the semester that they received these letters. Now, I will say that I'm too far out of it to know the timing of these things, so I'm kind of giving you the information of what I remembered as of many years ago. But it's otherwise an eligible admitted student, and that student would not have been recruited for MFOS. Now, they may have been attempted to be recruited for other reasons to the university through the admissions office and their activities. And maybe, you know, there is dialogues that, you know, they may, for instance, and I don't know if this is the case, but maybe, you know, if there's recruitment being done at a college fair and these students are from high schools that predominantly are lower income, they may know that, right? And they may say, you know, you really should apply to UF because we have this great program here. And, you know, and that may have been a way to inform them of it, but not outright recruiting for it.
Yeah, I was talking to Leslie and she was telling me how also there's about a 24% of African-American or Black students of Black body population through the program. And I guess my question here is, do you think it could get higher? Of the those numbers could get higher. I mean, at the end, I mean, I do feel like the program does offer help for first generation, but when we're talking about bringing different groups, different cultures into the program, is the program able to do that and maybe raise in the next couple years? I don't know, like higher the numbers. I'm sure that's the goal that you're doing, but what has changed to do that?
Yeah, so if I'm following you, you're stating that roughly a quarter of the MFOS students identify as African American,
right.
And the question is is it possible to increase, that number? Because as we all know, just in the general population at UF, African American students are not well represented, and that there needs to be greater representation. I don't, and again, I don't have data to back this up with, but here is my suspicion. Here are my thoughts. Just putting emphasis aside, right? I suspect that getting into UF is tough, right? And if you are a person of color, or maybe identifying as such, I think you potentially can have other opportunities in terms of if you are academically or competent for admission into UF, you could potentially write your way to many other institutions outside of the state of Florida that are actively trying to recruit you. And so I don't know that to be the case, but I just sometimes wonder if that is one way that we're, quote, losing our students. We're losing them to other competitive institutions that value the same thing that we're valuing.
Okay. Thank you for your answer. Another question I had.
I don't think I answered your question, but I do.
I mean,
No,
right.
I think if I could just interject real quickly, Adolfo, I apologize, but yeah, Ron, I think that's kind of my impression too, because I talked to, especially a lot of African American and Hispanic parents from, say, South Florida who will contact me, and they'll say, well, my son or daughter, sometimes these are friends, right? So it gets kind of complicated. I'll say, my son or daughter, nephew or niece, have got this really, they're amazing students. They're valedictorian, level students. They got accepted to UF. They've also got accepted to Duke and another, and so they'll say, well, help us make the call. And I'm like, well, number one, y'all have got to make the call, right? But I think you're right. I think that we do. And again, this is anecdotal, right? I don't have a study to back me up, but based on conversations with friends who have kids who are, college age, I think you're right on target. We are losing out some of students of color who end up going out of state, who are just, they're all stars. They could go here, they could go to Chapel Hill. Frankly, some of them could go to Harvard, and so, or all of the above. So yeah, it's a challenge.
Yeah, that is my sentiment as well.
Yeah. Another question I did have for the students that weren't, because out of all the students that do go through the program, there's some that don't make it through the entire 4 years. So did you ever encounter any of those students, and how did the program go about them? And how did you feel personally when you knew that you had to say goodbye? And did you kept up with them maybe the following years, or that was it?
So you're unfortunately are right. There is definitely, from first to second year, the retention exceeds that of the non-FOS students here on campus. I believe that's the case. It either exceeds it or is the same as, right? As we go on beyond that, though, that's when things, for a variety of reasons, start to play a role and a factor into their continuance. Some could be as absolutely as simple as they just didn't apply again for the program. They thought once being offered the program, there's nothing more that they have to do. Now, granted, that's not a large percentage, but that begins the attrition that you have. So then when they're not getting paid, they're not getting money, then they're not able to, obviously sustain themselves, and they have to start to make other choices. In addition, sometimes eligibility for the student changes because the parent may find themselves in a better financial spot, and then they become ineligible for the program. Now, there are thresholds that are put into place. Just because you didn't make exactly the same amount of money last year as you did this year, you're kicked off the program. But, sometimes, good things happen to people and they're now making more money, and then they may start losing eligibility. Other times, academically speaking, they're short. They're either their GPAs or the credit hours they're earning that they require are not there. And all of these, well, not all of these things, but the latter of those things, they're petitionable, and students can bring. And that was part of the work that I did when I was in the financial aid office, which was making these decisions and calls in terms of putting students back into the program or not into the program. And then there are instances, and I'm surprised I didn't mention this before, there's instances in which, from a funding standpoint, they're basically sending money back home to their mom or to their dad, and now they start to struggle because the parent needs the money, maybe sometimes more than they do, and they feel guilted into the fact that, if I don't do this, how good am I as a son or as a daughter? And then those things start impacting them here at UF. The focus, they take the eye off the ball when it comes to going to school, that this is what you're here for, this is your job. And then you have all this drama going on back in wherever, and it's playing a part in terms of your success, here at UF. And so, in trying to mitigate that and work through that, I mean, there were students who we did everything that we had. I remember, forget how many years ago it was. We had, and Leslie, I'm not going to use the student's name, obviously, but Leslie would know the story because she and I worked together to help this young man. This young man, came here into the program, and it was almost something like out of a movie, in the sense of he was, I forget, was it his aunt? I think it was his aunt. His aunt was stealing from him and somehow got into his bank account, changed his UF credentials and everything, and was physically threatening him, taking his money. And obviously, this student is not doing well because he has all this, ridiculous family drama going on, in the background. And we worked with him for quite a while. Sometimes, and this is going to sound harsh, sometimes people don't want to be helped, in the sense that we're doing everything possible, but they either don't see themselves as an agent in this, or for whatever reasons they just can't get out from under where they are with this. And he was one of those persons, unfortunately, and he kind of fell off, and I have no idea what ever happened to him. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, unfortunately, that does play a lot with culture, I believe, I feel, because similarly that happened to me, where I had to stop going to school because I had to take care of my mother. She had to pay rent, and if she didn't, she would lose her house or her apartment. And so at that point, it's like you get to work, or like as the only male in my family, it's like in our culture, it's kind of like you have to step it up and take care of that before anything else. But eventually, I did what I had to do. My time, I guess that's what I like to call it, where I got it financially stable, secure, and that's when I came back to redo everything again. But it's not an easy thing, because I see like how poverty could bring you to that level of to be in that level and get you stuck. Sometimes it's very systematic. But nonetheless, I think you could succeed from all those struggles if you're persistent, and I feel like if you keep fighting on. But I mean, it's a hard road ahead for many of those students. And being first generation, coming from another cultures, or just getting it put into this UF institution, I believe it makes it difficult. It makes it difficult to succeed, especially if there's different environments that you've never experienced in your life, and if you're a minority. And so I think that's where I feel like inclusion is necessary within the programs. So making it multicultural, brings, I feel it's a space of solidarity for people, because then it's like nobody's different. We're all with different groups, and I think that's something that I feel like MFOS has done, or it's working on doing, because I feel like it could always get better and better. But I mean, for the time being, I mean, I think it's spectacular the way the work that they have done.
What you said reminded me of something. I forgot about this. So early on, like when the first program first started, we were having many discussions of the identity of these students. And, basically, are students going to embrace FOS, or are they going to feel as though, hey, we're the poor kids that are here and everyone's going to know that, right? And, what I thought was amazing was that it was never that. It was always that not only did they, and I say this because it's, I think, a key piece of it, these students were admitted under no special circumstances whatsoever for any other reason other than their academic ability to be here at the University of Florida, right? And so students embraced that culture of FOS. And that's, I think, has always been the case, but it's only gotten better, with that. That's a key. I think that's a key piece of it. I forgot about that we as dumb administrators back then were like, should we, how should we, are we outing these students? Are we making them, feel, or going to make them feel in a way inferior? And that was not the case.
Well, Ron, we've taken up an hour of your time. I feel bad because I know as our ombudsperson, you have an incredibly packed schedule. But if you wouldn't mind, maybe just a couple concluding questions, if you have the time.
Sure.
Okay, cool. So you talked a lot about the early years of the program, kind of feeling your way. That it took a while to get the administrative structure set. Leslie coming in obviously is a big watershed moment. Could you talk about now that you've had all these years in helping to really build this amazing program? What are your visions for, the next 5 or 10 years of the now Machen Florida Opportunity Scholars Program? Like, what do you hope that it accomplishes in the future, or maybe that it hasn't been able to done so far? Or, what are some of those hopes?
Yeah, so obviously and these are Ron Anderson's opinions here, right? I think that growing the program just purely in terms of the amount of students who we're able to help is, I think, a thought that is always there every year, a conversation every year. And I think this past year, they were able to increase the enrollment into the program. So I think that's definitely a goal that's going to be there. I think job readiness, in terms of getting students either ready for careers after graduation or moving on to the next stage in his or her education in terms of grad school, getting those students, to better prepared at that. I mean, I think we do a good job. I think we do a very good job. But you still will have those students who are like me, who leave here and they're just kind of like, okay, I guess I got to do something now. And so to help capture those students, I think we are there's always a need for fundraising, to continue with that, because I mean, the university cannot sustain or shoulder the entirety of the cost of the program. I mean, it's an expensive program. I mean, some of it is definitely paid for through federal grants, Pell grants, things like that. But a large chunk of it is coming, through either donors or through some areas of the university, and I don't know where those are now, and things have changed with that. And I think our graduates, our postgraduates, I know that there's been a lot of work that's being done by Leslie's team in working with those who have graduated and keeping them, associated with the program, you know, not quite, I mean, not so much as ambassadors, but in the sense of just, being able to reach out into their own communities to make it known to those younger persons who are growing up, that are coming through, that this was a reality. I mean, you can look at me, and not me literally, but look at me as that student, and you can identify how I look. And I'm a person who maybe lived in your same neighborhood, and I was 10 years younger than you were, and you can do the same things that I did. So encouraging our alumni to be those, I guess they are ambassadors, to further the program itself.
Excellent. Thank you, Ron. Adolfo, do you have any like a follow-up question or?
The only question I would have is, where do you see the program heading in the next 10, 15, 20 years from now?
Longer term.
Right. Longer term, yeah.
I'm going to give you my best answer. I don't have enough insider knowledge to be able to give. It would be strictly only my opinion, of where that would be. I don't think the program's going anywhere in the sense of, it will sustain and continue, will grow. I think there's going to be at some point more of a convergence between student affairs and academic affairs in the program itself, because it was housed within student affairs. Even with financial aid back then was in student affairs, at the time, and so it was strictly a student affairs thing. And now I see that we're working more collaboratively with the academic units on campus and academic affairs, undergraduate affairs, associate provost office, and things like that. So I see a greater melding and collaboration on that end for the student success academically. So that's maybe a direction I think maybe it'll be going more towards. But that is merely my speculation. Who's to say what Ron Anderson knows?
Well, hey, Ron, one last question that does come to mind is that, you've had such a remarkable run in working with Opportunity Scholars students over the years, and you've shared with us some stories about, what the program has meant to you. You have built your own career as a very successful professional here at the University of Florida. How has working with these students impacted like your life and your career trajectory?
It's been wonderful. You know what my role is here at UF, and there's definitely a good portion of what I do here that I'm having to give information and give responses that are not to the satisfaction of what a person is wanting to hear many times, and it's just the nature of the role. I'm a neutral and as objective party as one can be. But when working with these students, it's always positive. It's always a positive thing that I can work with them and sit with them and talk with them. They are hungry and grateful, for being here and for receiving the help that they can get. I want to show you one thing. Hold on one second, okay? This was, hopefully you can see it. This was a card I got from a former MFOS, well, actually two students. They were best buddies, right? And see if you can read what it says.
Without you, this would not be possible. Thank you for everything, and we are very grateful. God bless. Heisen and Marcus.
Yep. And that's Heisen and Marcus there, graduating.
Nice. Wow, that's beautiful.
That's what makes my day.
Yeah. Wow, thank you, Ron, for sharing that. That was really cool. And see, that's exactly the kind of thing when we're working on also, the film, we want to start, we're also going to be kind of collecting documents, and, that's just a treasure, and so, again, we will be processing the interview. We will make a copy, send you a copy, however many copies you like. We're still, we do the old school thing, we mix the interview down, and we can give you CD or DVD copies of it,
Okay.
in the next month or so. We'll check back in with you probably more towards the middle or towards the end of the semester, just to kind of let you know how the project is going. And you can always talk to Leslie as well. And like I said, we'll be going over the kind of the film production parts a bit later in the summer. But yeah, thank you so much again for your time. And if you have any other thoughts, or you say, hey, I got, I want to sit down and talk to you a little more, Paul, about some aspects of the program, just let us know, and we can do that anytime. Okay.
I will. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Adolfo.
Thank you.
Again, I'm honored to have been asked to be a part of this. I can't wait to see it.
Yes. All right. Well, you have a wonderful day and have a great weekend, Rob.
All right. You do the same.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.